The first thing Alex saw wasn't a small, dark shape huddled against his porch steps. It was the blood, a trail of crimson, stark and alarming against the pure white snow, led from the shadowy edge of the pine forest to the thing trembling on his doorstep. The Wyoming blizzard screamed around him, a solid wall of wind and ice. Dropping to his knees, the cold seeping instantly through his jeans, he saw it was no larger than his hand, its eyes tightly shut, its entire body shaking violently against the -25-degree wind. What he discovered on that frozen night would reshape his life more profoundly than any combat experience ever had. "Hey," he whispered, his voice rough from days of silence. "Hey, little guy." The bundle of fur was soot black, and so still he thought he might be too late. It was no puppy, a truth that would soon make seasoned biologists take a cautious step back. But on that bitter evening in late January, Alex had no clue he was about to raise one of nature's most formidable predators as his own. Alex had moved to this remote part of Wyoming 8 months earlier, chasing solitude. The VA doctors had run out of options for his PTSD, pills that fogged his mind, therapy sessions that felt like scratching at the surface of a deep wound. The nightmares visited him without fail every night. Not just dreams, but full sensory flashbacks, the concussive blast of IEDs, the heat, the dust, the weight of a fallen comrade. His cabin, a solid 30 miles from the nearest town, was supposed to be his sanctuary, a place where he could come apart at the seams with no one there to watch. The puppy, if that's what it was, felt almost weightless as he scooped it up. He tucked it inside his heavy flannel shirt against the warmth of his chest and felt a faint, fluttering heartbeat against the scar tissue on his skin. Stumbling back inside, the warmth of the cabin hitting him like a physical wall. 20 years of military instinct took over. He moved with efficient urgency, grabbing clean towels from the bathroom cupboard. He cranked the ironwood stove until it roared with heat. He began the slow, careful process of warming the frozen animal. The ice crystals matted in its fur melted away, revealing a coat so deeply black it seemed to swallow the lamplight. As he worked, gently rubbing life back into the miniature limbs, he noted the paws. They seemed disproportionately large for such a small body. Strange, he thought, but filed it away. Exhaustion and a fierce, protective concern pushed any deeper analysis from his mind. "Come on, don't you quit on me now," Alex murmured, his voice gaining strength. The creature stirred, a weak, almost silent whimper escaping its throat. Alex had witnessed enough death to recognize the will to live, and this tiny, helpless thing was fighting with everything it had. He found a can of evaporated milk in the pantry, mixed it with warm water, and used an old eyedropper from his extensive first aid kit to feed the animal, drop by precious drop. Slowly, life seemed to seep back into the small form. By 2 a.m., it was breathing steadily, curled into a tight ball in a nest of towels placed safely near the radiating heat of the stove. Alex collapsed into his worn leather recliner, his eyes fixed on the rhythmic rise and fall of the tiny chest. For the first time in months, his mind wasn't trapped in a desert halfway across the world. It wasn't calculating sight lines or potential threats in his quiet living room. He was completely, utterly focused on this single, fragile life he had pulled from the jaws of a storm. When the dawn finally broke, painting the snow-blanketed landscape in shades of pink and gold, both Alex and the puppy were still breathing. The closest vet was in the town of Silver Creek, a 2-hour drive on a clear day. The roads were still treacherous, layers of hard-packed snow and ice, but Alex bundled the puppy, whom he had already started calling Onyx for his jet-black fur, into a cardboard box lined with more towels and began the careful journey. Dr. Isabel Reyes had been treating animals in Wyoming for over 25 years. She barely glanced up from her computer when Alex walked in, carrying what looked like a shepherd mix puppy. "Found him in the storm," Alex explained, his words clipped and efficient. "Needed to make sure he's okay." Isabel's examination was methodical and practiced. "Probably around 2 weeks old," she said, checking Onyx's gums and feeling his body. "Definitely some shepherd in there. Maybe a bit of Malamute, judging by those big feet. He's undernourished, but he should bounce back with the right care. You planning to keep him?" Alex hadn't actually considered the question until that moment. He had acted on pure, unthinking instinct. saving a life because it was the right thing to do. But as Onyx's tiny paw curled around his index finger, he felt something unlock in his heart. A door he thought had been sealed shut forever. Yeah, he heard himself say, the word feeling foreign but right. I'm keeping him. Dr. Reyes provided antibiotics, deworming medication, and a special puppy formula. He'll need feeding every 4 hours for the next few weeks, she explained. It's a huge commitment. Sure you're up for it? Alex thought of his empty cabin, his silent, sleepless nights, the days that stretched before him with no purpose. Doc, he said, a faint, wry smile touching his lips for the first time in months. I've got nothing but time. The drive home was quiet, the only sound the hum of the truck's engine and Onyx's occasional soft whimpers from the box on the passenger seat. Alex found himself talking to the puppy, his voice rusty but gradually warming up. See that meadow there? He said, gesturing out the window. That's where the moose come through in the spring. And that cliff face? That's where the golden eagles nest. Back at the cabin, Alex applied a military-level precision to Onyx's care. Feeding schedules were strict, maintained to the minute. He kept a detailed logbook, noting every ounce of weight gained, every behavioral change, every developmental milestone. The puppy responded to this regimented care by thriving. Within a week, Onyx's eyes had opened, revealing striking, pale blue irises that seemed far too knowing and intelligent for such a young animal. Alex would spend hours sitting on the floor, letting the puppy explore the vast landscape of his lap, feeling the sharp prick of needle-like teeth on his fingers. The nightmares didn't vanish completely, but their frequency lessened. At Bonds Unspoken, we believe every story between a human and their animal companion deserves to be heard. If you agree, please like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you can join us every time another bond speaks louder than words. On the nights they did wrench him from sleep, sweating and disoriented, Alex would check on Onyx. Sometimes he'd bring the puppy to bed, where the small, warm weight pressed against his chest would slowly calm the frantic beating of his heart. Onyx, even at his young age, seemed to sense Alex's distress, often waking to nuzzle his hand during the worst of the dreams. The first visit from a neighbor, a man named Ben Carter, no relation, happened 3 weeks after the rescue. Ben was a retired game warden who made it his business to casually check on the various loners scattered through the vast valley. He took one look at Onyx and let out a low, appreciative whistle. That's one big puppy you got there, Alex, Ben observed. Onyx was already the size of a full-grown cocker spaniel, his paws looking comically oversized on his body. How old is he? 6 weeks. Ben asked. For weeks, Alex corrected, showing Ben the vet's paperwork. Ben's eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. For weeks? Good Lord, Alex. What are you feeding him? Miracle Grow. It was meant as a light-hearted joke, but it planted the very first, tiny seed of unease in Alex's mind. The receptionist's cheerful words echoed in his head. Asterisk, probably a bit of wolf hybrid. Asterisk, it was a common enough thing to say. So, why did it feel like a warning? Onyx was growing at a rate that defied every chart and guide Alex could find. His appetite was voracious, and he transitioned from formula to solid food weeks earlier than any resource suggested was normal. His coordination developed with breathtaking speed. By 5 weeks old, he was running with a fluid, powerful grace that seemed almost supernatural. But Alex, isolated in his cabin, had no real benchmark for normal puppy development. He assumed all puppies were just this intense. Onyx's intelligence was the next thing to manifest. He learned his name within 2 days and came when called with an eagerness that was startling. He seemed to understand complex commands that Alex hadn't even intentionally taught him. If Alex simply thought about getting ready for bed, Onyx would trot over to his blanket near the wood stove. If Alex reached for his coat, Onyx would be waiting patiently by the door, tail waving slowly. It was as if the animal could sense his intentions, reading the subtle shifts in his energy and posture. The bond between them deepened with every passing day. Alex found himself structuring his entire existence around Onyx's needs. Their morning walks became elaborate explorations of the surrounding wilderness. Onyx displayed an uncanny knack for tracking scents, his nose constantly to ground. deciphering a world of information Alex could only imagine. He navigated the dense timber and rocky outcrops with an inherent confidence that Alex found both impressive and, increasingly, a little unsettling. The puppy showed no fear of the vast, untamed land that surrounded them. By week 6, Onyx had tripled in size yet again. His black coat had grown thick and lustrous, with a dense undercoat that seemed to repel snow and moisture. His teeth, when Alex cautiously checked them, were longer and sharper than he felt was standard. But what did he know about standard? He'd never owned a dog before. His entire adult life had been about completing missions and keeping his soldiers alive. This, caring for a developing creature, was entirely new territory. The first truly strange incident occurred on a crisp March morning when Onyx was 7 weeks old. Alex had let him out for his usual bathroom break and was inside measuring coffee grounds when he heard a brief, sharp scuffle in the yard. He raced outside, expecting to see a squirrel teasing the puppy, but instead found Onyx standing proudly over a dead snowshoe hare, a smear of blood on his muzzle. The kill had been clean and terrifyingly efficient. A single, precise bite to the neck. How in the world did you catch that? Alex asked the chilly morning air, a knot tightening in his stomach. Onyx wasn't even 2 months old, yet he had hunted and killed with the skill of a mature predator. A part of him, the soldier, admired the clean efficiency of the kill. The other part, the man seeking peace, felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Alex cleaned up the rabbit, feeling disturbed but rationalizing it away. Some dogs just have strong hunting instincts, he told himself. Mountain dogs need to be tough to survive out here. Dr. Reyes wasn't in when Alex called the clinic later that day, but the receptionist was reassuring. "Oh, some puppies are just natural-born hunters," she said cheerfully. "Probably has a bit of wolf hybrid in him. It's not uncommon around here." The comment should have sparked more concern, but Alex was too deeply absorbed in the day-to-day reality of caring for Onyx to dwell on it. The puppy, despite his unusual size and abilities, was profoundly affectionate and loyal. He followed Alex from room to room, slept pressed against his legs on the couch, and seemed to understand Alex's moods better than any human ever had. When a sudden wave of anxiety would creep up Alex's spine, Onyx would appear silently at his side, leaning his solid weight against Alex's leg. When the nightmares woke him, Onyx was already alert, watching over him from the bedside, a silent, living guardian. By the end of March, Onyx weighed a solid 45 pounds. His paws were enormous, his head was broad and powerful, and his legs were long and corded with muscle. When he stood next to the kitchen table, his head nearly reached the surface. Neighbors who occasionally stopped by began to make comments that grew less casual and more concerned. Ben Carter came by again, watching Onyx pace the perimeter of the cabin's main room with a fluid, predatory grace that was utterly captivating and slightly unnerving. "Alex," Ben said, his tone losing its usual folksy humor. "I've seen a lot of dogs in my time. A lot. And that is something else entirely. He's just big for his breed," Alex defended, though a worm of doubt was now actively gnawing at his insides. "The vet said he's probably got some Malamute in him." Ben looked deeply skeptical, but true to the mountain code of minding your own business, he didn't push. He simply made a mental note to keep his own bird dog locked up tight when he got home. The truth that Alex was not ready to face was becoming increasingly obvious, even to him. Onyx's howl, when he first voiced it on a clear, cold night in early April, was not the playful bark howl of a dog. It was something primal and ancient, a sound that seemed to reach directly into the primitive part of Alex's brain and make every hair on his body stand on end. It was a mournful, powerful call that carried for miles across the silent valley, speaking of wild places and freedoms that modern man had long forgotten. Other signs began to accumulate like evidence for a case Alex didn't want to prosecute. There was a way Onyx's eyes reflected light in the darkness, glow in eerie, phosphorescent green fire. His clear preference for raw meat over the high-quality kibble Alex bought. The way he moved through the forest in absolute silence, a black ghost flitting between the trees despite his increasing size and weight. The way other dogs reacted to him with immediate, cowering submission or outright terror when they encountered him on the rare trip into town. The way he would sit for hours, watching the tree line at dusk, his body rigid and alert, tracking movements and sounds that Alex could not even perceive. But for Alex, Onyx was nothing short of salvation. The dog, or whatever he was, had given him a purpose again. The rigid, comforting structure of care and training, the physical exertion of their increasingly long daily hikes, the companionship that asked for nothing but his presence, all of it was slowly, painstakingly, piecing him back together. The prescription bottle sat untouched in his medicine cabinet. His scheduled therapy appointments were forgotten. Onyx was healing him in ways no human intervention had ever managed. As April warmed into May, Onyx's growth showed no signs of slowing down. At what Alex believed to be 3 months old, Onyx weighed nearly 75 pounds of pure muscle and sinew. His coat was magnificent. So deeply black it showed hints of silver in the direct sunlight, and so thick that Alex's fingers would disappear into it when he petted him. Those pale blue eyes now held a depth of intelligence that sometimes made Alex feel like he was a pet, not the other way around. The pivotal moment, the incident that shattered any remaining illusion of normalcy, came on a balmy May evening when Onyx was supposedly 14 weeks old. Alex had been out back, splitting logs for the winter ahead, the rhythmic thwack of the axe a satisfying sound. Then he heard it, a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the very ground, making his blood run cold. He turned slowly. Onyx was standing between him and the forest edge, his body low to the ground, his hackles raised into a sharp ridge along his spine. His lips were pulled back to reveal a formidable array of teeth that were, Alex now saw with chilling clarity, too long, too sharp, and too numerous for any dog breed he knew. A mountain lion emerged from the shadows of the pines. It was a massive tom, easily 180 pounds, its tawny coat blending seamlessly with the dry grass. It was likely drawn by the scent of the mule deer Alex had butchered and stored the previous day. The cat's cold, yellow eyes locked onto Alex, assessing him as nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle or perhaps a potential meal. Alex's rifle was propped against the cabin wall, a mere 15 feet away. It might as well have been a mile. He gripped the axe handle, knowing it would be a pitifully inadequate defense against the cat's claws and crushing bite. Onyx moved forward, placing himself firmly between Alex and the predator. The sound that erupted from his throat was nothing like a dog's warning bark. It was a roar of pure challenge, a promise of devastating violence that made the mountain lion pause in its stalking advance. Onyx, at 75 pounds, should have been nothing more than a snack for the big cat. But something in his posture, the absolute lack of fear, the confident dominance in his stance, the primal power in his voice, spoke of one apex predator recognizing another. The standoff lasted only half a minute, though it felt like a lifetime to Alex. The mountain lion, calculating the risk, eventually backed away. It let out a final, frustrated snarl, and then melted back into the forest as silently as it had arrived. Onyx maintained a protective stance until the threat was completely gone, then turned to Alex, his tail wagging gently as if he had just performed a simple, expected trick. Alex sank to his knees, the adrenaline crash making his hands tremble violently as he buried them in Onyx's thick, warm fur. His hands trembled not from fear of the cat, but from the terrifying power of the creature now nuzzling his hand. "What are you, boy?" he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "What are you, really?" The silence in the truck on the way to Dr. Reyes's clinic was heavy, thick with the unspoken dread of the DNA results they were about to collect. Onyx, sensing Alex's tension, sat perfectly still in the back seat, his intelligent blue eyes fixed on the back of Alex's head. The ravens had been a bad omen. Dozens of them had gathered in the trees around the cabin at dawn, their harsh, croaking calls creating a soundtrack of impending doom. Alex tried to shrug it off as coincidence, but the pit in his stomach told him otherwise. Dr. Reyes's face, when she met them at the door of the clinic, confirmed everything. Her professional composure was stretched thin over a layer of sheer disbelief. She barely glanced at the paperwork in her hand. Her eyes instead locked on Onyx, who had to duck his head to clear the standard door frame. "Alex," she began, her voice carefully controlled, though her hands betrayed a slight tremble. This can't be the same animal you brought in 3 months ago." Onyx stood in the middle of the examination room, making the stainless steel table look like a toy. The floor vibrated slightly with each of his steps. At over 90 pounds, he moved with a fluid, powerful grace. His shoulders were broad, his chest deep, his legs long and built for covering vast distances at a relentless pace. When he turned his gaze on Dr. Reyes, she took an involuntary step backward. Her rational mind was fighting a losing battle with the primal part of her brain that screamed one word: predator. "This animal is the size of a fully grown Irish wolfhound," she said, her voice low. "But he's built like what, Doc?" Alex asked, though he already knew the word she couldn't bring herself to say. It hung in the air between them. Too wild, too impossible for the sterile, fluorescent-lit room. Dr. Reyes approached Onyx slowly, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. To her surprise, Onyx sat calmly, allowing her to run her hands over his body, though his unwavering eyes never left her face. His muscles were like coiled steel under the impossibly thick black coat. His bone structure was massive and different. When she gently lifted his lip to examine his teeth, she had to suppress a sharp intake of breath. The canines were nearly 2 inches long, designed for gripping and tearing flesh, not for chewing kibble from a bowl. "Alex, I need to be straight with you," she said, stepping back and wiping her hands on her coat. "This is not a dog. I don't know how or why, but what you have here is not any breed of domestic canine I have ever encountered, and I've seen every mix imaginable." "He was dying in the snow," Alex said, his jaw tight. "I couldn't just leave him." "I'm not saying you did wrong," Dr. Reyes replied, her tone softening. "But we need to figure out what he actually is. There are legal implications, safety concerns, not to mention the biological impossibility of what I'm looking at. Would you consent to a DNA test?" The wait for the results was supposed to take 2 weeks. Dr. Reyes expedited it, paying extra from her own pocket because she had to know. She had to understand what was standing in her clinic, wearing a collar and leashed like a pet, when every fiber of her being screamed that this was a wild apex predator. During those 2 weeks of agonizing suspension, Alex found himself watching Onyx with new, fearful eyes. The animal's behavior became impossible to rationalize as mere canine quirks. Onyx had started patrolling the perimeter of Alex's property each night. Not just a yard, but a wide circle that encompassed several acres. His howls, which now came with ritualistic regularity every evening, were being answered by multiple, distinct voices from the deep wilderness. It sounded less like random calls and more like conversations in a language Alex couldn't understand. Conversations that made the hair on his arms stand on end. The hunting had escalated. 2. Onyx no longer bothered with rabbits or hares. One morning, Alex found the remains of a young elk not 100 yards from the cabin. It had been taken down with brutal, surgical precision, a clean, professional kill. The work of an animal that knew exactly where to bite to cause instant death. When Alex confronted Onyx about it, the animal simply looked at him with those impossibly intelligent eyes, as if to say, "Asterisk, this is what I am. Take it or leave it. Asterisk." But it was a protective behavior that affected Alex the most profoundly. Onyx had appointed himself Alex's full-time guardian, a role he took so seriously that even Ben Carter had stopped making surprise visits. The retired game warden had made the mistake of approaching Alex from behind during one of their walks. Onyx's reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. There was no violence, just a swift, silent repositioning of his body between Alex and Ben, a low rumble that seemed to emanate from the earth itself, and a bare-teeth display that made Ben freeze mid-step, his face pale. "That is not a pet, Alex," Ben had said afterward, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool mountain air. "That is a weapon with a heartbeat." Alex wanted to argue, to defend Onyx, but the words died in his throat. How could he? Onyx was becoming something that challenged every definition of domestication. And yet, when they were alone in the cabin, Onyx was gentle, affectionate, even. He would rest his massive head on Alex's lap, while Alex read, his way to profound comfort. He seemed to sense Alex's moods with an almost psychic accuracy, providing a distracting nudge during anxiety attacks and quiet, steadfast companionship during the dark moments when memories threatened to pull him under. The DNA results arrived on a Thursday morning. Dr. Reyes's face when she handed Alex the single sheet of paper told him everything before he even looked at it. Her professional composure was gone, replaced by a mixture of awe and deep concern. Alex looked down at the genetic analysis report. The scientific terminology blurred before his eyes until one line came into sharp, devastating focus. Canis lupus occidentalis, northwestern gray wolf. 100% match. This is impossible, Dr. Reyes said, pacing her small office while Alex sat numbly in the chair, the paper trembling in his hands. A pure wolf, Alex. Not even a hybrid. Do you understand what this means? Alex understood perfectly. He had not rescued an abandoned puppy. He had taken in a wolf pup, a runt likely left to die by its pack during that brutal blizzard. He had raised it as a dog, fed it from a bottle, let it sleep in his bed. He had created a bond that could not exist between a wild-born predator and a broken human being. Everything made sense now. The rapid growth, the preternatural hunting skill, the haunting howls, the intelligence that went far beyond canine comprehension. Onyx was not Onyx at all. He was a northwestern gray wolf, one of the largest, most powerful subspecies in North America. What do I do now? Alex asked, his voice hollow. The thought of losing Onyx, of having him taken away, made something in his chest constrict so painfully he could barely breathe. Legally, Dr. Reyes said, stopping her pacing and looking at her with profound sympathy, you are required to report this to Fish and Wildlife. Keeping a pure wolf without permits is a federal offense. They will want to relocate him to a sanctuary or, if they deem him suitable, reintroduce him to a wild pack. She paused, studying his devastated expression. Realistically, you have a little time to figure this out. But Alex, you need to understand the danger here. Wolves are not pets. As he matures, his instincts will become stronger. He could hurt you, or worse, he could hurt someone else. The drive home was utterly silent, except for Onyx's occasional, questioning whine from the back seat, sensing the tsunami of distress rolling off Alex. His mind raced through impossible scenarios. He couldn't give Onyx up. The wolf was the only thing standing between him and the bottomless abyss of his PTSD. But keeping him was illegal, undeniably dangerous, and ethically murky. Was it fair to Onyx to keep him from his own kind? Was it safe for Alex to share his home with an animal genetically programmed to be a wild hunter, an animal that could kill him with a single, powerful bite? That night, Alex sat on his porch with Onyx beside him, both of them watching the moon rise over the jagged peaks of the Tetons. Onyx's howl, when it came, was different this time. It was mournful questioning, as if he, too, understood that a fundamental truth had been revealed, shattering the careful fiction they had lived. The answering calls from a wilderness seemed closer tonight, more insistent, more personal. You belong out there, don't you? Alex said softly, his fingers threading through the dense fur at Onyx's neck. With them, not with me. Onyx turned those luminous blue eyes on Alex, and in that moment, Alex could have sworn he saw understanding there, maybe even disagreement. The wolf then leaned his full weight against Alex's leg, a familiar gesture of affection and possession that now felt less like comfort and more like a claim. The question was no longer, what are you, but what do we do now? The official convoy that wound its way up Alex's dirt road a week later sounded like a small, determined army, the crunch of gravel on ice a grim percussion beneath the truck engines. 2 stark white trucks from Wyoming fishing game, a county sheriff's cruiser with its light bar dark but ominous, and a large, windowless veterinary transport van designed for restraining bears and other large animals. Alex watched them approach from his window, his palm resting flat on Onyx's broad, solid head. The wolf stood perfectly still, but Alex could feel the tension thrumming through him like a live wire. Every muscle was coiled, a low, continuous growl rumbling in his chest that vibrated up through Alex's arm. He understood the threat. These uniformed men and women represented far better than Alex had hoped. Easy, boy, Alex murmured, though his own heart was hammering with the familiar, sickening rhythm of a looming firefight. We knew this day would come. We just have to face it. Dr. Reyes was with them. Her presence was a complicated nod of betrayal and a small, desperate comfort. She had held out as long as she could, But when the digital world started buzzing with the cell phone video and demand for answers, she'd had no choice but to confirm the DNA results to the authorities. Her face, seen through the windshield, was pale and etched with a deep, apologetic regret. The lead officer was a man named Garrett Walsh, a 25-year veteran of wildlife services whose face was a roadmap of weathered lines and resigned patience. He approached the porch with the weary authority of a man who had seen every well-intentioned but disastrous idea people had about wild animals. His hand rested casually on the pistol grip of the tranquilizer gun holstered on his hip, a gesture that made Onyx's growl intensify into a visible ripple along his powerful shoulders, his lips peeling back to show a sliver of formidable white teeth. "Mr. Carter," Walsh began, his voice professionally neutral, devoid of malice but also of flexibility. "We have confirmed through veterinary testimony that you are harboring a purebred northwestern gray wolf without state or federal permits. That is a direct violation of Code 23-1-301. We're here to secure the animal and transport him to a licensed sanctuary where he can live with others of his kind." "His name is Onyx," Alex said, his own voice dropping into the clipped, commanding tone he'd used to lead men in a different kind of conflict. It made the younger officer standing behind Walsh straighten up almost imperceptibly. "I raised him from a pup. He's never known a day without me. He doesn't know any life but this one. He doesn't want another life." "That may be your perception," Walsh replied, his stance unchanging, a rock against the tide of Alex's emotion. "But a law doesn't concern itself with what a wild animal wants. It concerns itself with public safety and protection of a species that, frankly, doesn't need well-meaning humans confusing its instincts. The animal will be relocated. That is not a negotiation." The standoff stretched, the silence broken only by the whisper of the wind in the pines and Onyx's relentless, low growl. Onyx hadn't moved a millimeter from his protective position, his pale blue eyes tracking every human with a chilling, calculating intelligence. It wasn't just a size that was intimidating. It was a controlled power, the palpable sense of supremely confident predator consciously choosing restraint, that made the situation feel so volatile, like a powder keg waiting for a single spark. Dr. Reyes finally broke the silence, stepping forward slowly, her hands held up in a placating gesture. "Garrett, may I?" She didn't wait for an answer, turning her worried gaze to Alex. "Alex, we need to find a practical solution here. Onyx is magnificent, but if he hurts someone, even by accident or out of fear, the consequences will be severe. For him, for you, and for every other wolf in Wyoming that ranchers will use this incident to protest against. We have to be realistic." "He would never." Alex started, the automatic defense on his lips, but the lie died in his throat. He looked into Onyx's eyes and felt the wolf's tense muscles under his hand. He saw the truth. Onyx would absolutely maim or kill to protect him. That wasn't a flaw in his loyalty. It was the very core of their bond, a bond written in primal, uncompromising code. There might be another way. A new voice cut through the tension, firm and clear. Ben Carter's old pickup truck crunched to a halt behind the official vehicles. With him was a woman Alex didn't recognize, sharp-eyed, with a steel-gray bob and a posture that screamed of unassailable authority. Ben, his face grim, gave Alex a slight, reassuring nod. Judge Eleanor Reed, he explained quickly, was his cousin and a retired federal magistrate with a lifelong, keen interest in wildlife law and ethical exceptions. "Walsh," she said, her tone leaving no room for preliminary pleasantries. She held a thick, well-organized folder in her hands. "I believe you'll find precedent in the state records for special circumstance permits in cases of documented human-wildlife bonding that provides measurable therapeutic benefit." She opened the folder, handing a highlighted document to the stunned wildlife officer. "Mr. Carter is a decorated Army veteran with severe, documented combat-related PTSD. His medical records, which he is authorized to share, show a dramatic and sustained improvement directly correlating with his responsibility for this animal. The state has clear provisions for emotional support and service animals. This is an extreme, I grant you, but a legally valid extension of that principle." The debate, suddenly and unexpectedly, moved inside the cabin, though Onyx refused to leave Alex's side, his massive presence making the rustic room feel claustrophobic. Judge Reed laid out her case with razor-sharp legal precision, citing three rare but existing precedents from other states where unique bonds have been legally recognized. The key, she argued, her finger tapping on a relevant legal text, was demonstrating that the therapeutic benefit to human demonstrably outweighed the potential risk, and that stringent, verifiable safeguards were in place. Walsh, sitting stiffly on the edge of Alex's sofa, was deeply skeptical. With all due respect, Judge, those cases involve domesticated animals with wild ancestry, wolf-dog hybrids at 80% a captive-bred fox. This is a Canis lupus occidentalis, a pure, wild-born wolf. It's an entirely different taxonomic and risk category. My hands are tied by the legislation. The heated legal discussion was violently interrupted by a sharp, raw cry of terror from outside. Everyone rushed back onto the porch. One of the young Fish and Game officers was stumbling backward, tripping over his own feet, his face a mask of pure, ashen fear. Emerging from the deep shadows of the pines was a massive grizzly bear, its coat shaggy and dull, ropes of thick saliva and foam flecking its powerful jaws. It was clearly agitated, possibly rabid or just desperately hungry after the long winter, and it had fixed a dense group of humans on the porch in its myopic, terrifying gaze. Time seemed to warp. Several officers fumbled for their sidearms and rifles, but the bear was already too close, covering ground with startling, explosive speed that defied its bulk. It was a charge, not a bluff. Onyx became a black streak of pure motion. One moment he was a solid, warm pressure against Alex's leg. The next, he was a contained explosion of muscle and fury, positioning himself squarely between the huddled humans and the 1 ton of enraged grizzly. His body dropped low to ground, hackles raised into a sharp mane, and a snarl tore from his throat that was so deeply primal, so devoid of any domesticity, that froze everyone, including the charging bear, in a heart-stopping tableau. The bear, a force of nature itself, skidded to a halt. Onyx, at 120 pounds, was dwarfed by the bear, which outweighed him by several hundred pounds. But the wolf showed not a flicker of hesitation, not a micron of fear. This was his territory. These were his people. The confrontation was terrifyingly brief, a conversation of postures and sounds that humans could never comprehend. Onyx didn't lunge. He held his ground, his vocalization and unwavering stance communicating a simple, brutal message that transcended species. Asterisk advance. And this will be a fight to the death. I will take a piece of you with me. Asterisk. The bear, an apex predator itself, recognized another. It saw not a dog, but a rival alpha, a creature of tooth and claw and unbreakable will. It hesitated, its small eyes calculating the certain, devastating cost of this meal. It huffed a great, steaming breath, shook its massive head in frustration, and then with a final, displeased grunt that sounded almost petulant, turned and lumbered back into the forest, disappearing into the dappled shadows as quickly as it had arrived. Onyx held his rigid protective stance for a full 10 seconds after the bear was utterly gone, ensuring the threat had truly passed. Then, and only then, did he turn. He walked calmly back to the porch, his claws clicking softly on the wooden steps, and sat down precisely at Alex's feet, looking up as if he had simply performed a routine, expected task. The silence on the porch was absolute, profound, broken only by the ragged, shocked breaths of the men and women who had just stared into the abyss. Garrett Walsh was the first to speak, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. That bear was charging. It would have gotten to us before we could even get a safety off. He just saved all of us, one of the younger officers whispered, his voice full of a reverent awe, his eyes wide as he stared at Onyx. Judge Reed looked from the empty tree line back to Onyx, her expression decisive and triumphant. Gentlemen, I believe you've just witnessed the most compelling argument for this bond that could ever be presented. This isn't a pet. This is a guardian, a partner, a living, breathing testament to a bond that clearly serves and protects. The mood on the porch had shifted irrevocably. The officials who had arrived with the single-minded purpose of confiscating a dangerous animal were now looking at Onyx with newfound, respectful fear. They had seen the wildness in him, but they had also seen the control, the choice, the loyalty. Walsh ran a hand over his face, the bureaucrat in him warring with the witness who had just had his life saved. He let out a long, slow breath, the sound of surrender to a higher, more compelling logic. There wouldn't need to be conditions, he said, his voice heavy with resignation. Strict, non-negotiable, and heavily monitored conditions. Name them, Alex said, his heart hammering against his ribs with fragile, soaring hope. Regular, unannounced inspections by my office and Dr. Reyes. Secure, reinforced 8-foot fencing around a minimum of 5 acres of your property. $2 million in liability insurance. No public appearances, no media, no contact with the general public. And absolutely no breeding. We will verify he is neutered. Agreed, Alex said immediately, without a second's hesitation. He would have agreed to anything. And if there is any aggressive incident, any attack, any bite, any charge on a human or livestock, the permit is revoked instantly and the animal is seized immediately. No second chances. Understood. Understood. Dr. Reyes spoke up, her voice firm now. Her confidence returned. I will provide all ongoing veterinary supervision and formally document the relationship for scientific and legal purposes. This could be invaluable research into cross-species bonding. Over the next hour, there on the porch with the afternoon sun dipping behind the mountains, they hammered out an unprecedented, legally shaky agreement. Onyx would be registered as a therapeutic support animal under a special, one-of-a-kind exotic species permit. It was a compromise that bent countless state and federal regulations, but it was a solution, a thread of hope spun from the aftermath of bear attack. As the convoy prepared to leave, the vehicles turning around in a cloud of dust, Walsh approached Alex alone. The other officers were already looking at Onyx not as a problem, but as a personage. You know this is a 1-in-a-million situation, right? Walsh said, his eyes not on Alex, but on Onyx, who watched him back with calm, intelligent eyes. We're breaking every protocol in the book today. My career is on the line with this. I know, Alex replied, the gratitude so thick his throat he could barely speak. Thank you. Walsh gave a slow, weary nod, a man who had seen the rule book rewritten before his eyes. Take care of each other, he said quietly. And for God's sake, keep them away from people who won't understand what they're seeing. After the last official vehicle disappeared down the winding dirt road, the dust settling back into the quiet of the evening, Alex sat on his porch steps, the adrenaline draining away to leave him utterly spent. Trembling with the aftershock, Onyx leaned his full, heavy weight against him, a warm, solid, living bulwark that grounded him to the earth, to this moment, to this hard-won victory. They had won. Against all odds, against the law, against nature itself, the man and the wolf could stay together. The victory felt fragile, a temporary armistice in a war Alex knew was far from over. The next month was a whirlwind of exhausting, expensive compliance. The 8-foot steel fence went up around a 5-acre portion of his land, a symbolic line that drained his savings and felt, to both of them, like a cage for a spirit that knew no boundaries. Dr. Reyes visited weekly, her examinations now part clinical, part anthropological. She documented everything. Onyx's weight, now a steady 130 pounds of lean muscle, the density of his coat, the sharpness of his senses. But she also noted the subtler things, the way he and Alex communicated with barely a glance, the specific whine Onyx used when Alex's breathing shallow anxiety, the way the wolf would herd him away from windows when he'd been staring into the middle distance for too long. He's not just a dog that looks like a wolf, Alex, she said one afternoon, closing her notebook. And he's not just a wolf tolerating a human. He's something in between, a new category. And he's reading your physiological state in a way I've never seen. The wild pack, drawn by Onyx's consistent presence and perhaps the sudden flurry of human activity, began visiting the new fence line with regularity. Alex would watch from his kitchen window, a knot of anxiety in his chest, as Onyx would go to meet them. There was no aggression. It was a quiet, dignified parliament of wolves. The alpha, the grizzled gray male, would often be there, and the two would touch noses through the mesh, their bodies relaxed. They would sometimes run parallel to the fence together, a silent, flowing dance of shadows and fur. It looked like a conversation. It looked like family. Every time, Alex held his breath. And every time, Onyx would break away. He would turn his back on his own kind and pace back to the cabin, to Alex. The choice, remade daily, was a humbling miracle that never lost its power. The first unannounced inspection from Garrett Walsh was a tense affair. The wildlife officer walked the perimeter of the fence, checking the locks and the grounding wires, his eyes constantly flicking Onyx, who watched his every move from a respectful distance, silent and still. "He's calm," Walsh noted, his tone betraying his surprise. "He knows the rules," Alex replied, "and he knows you're not a threat to me." Walsh finished his inspection and stood for a long moment, just watching Onyx watch him. "I've been doing this job a long time, Carter. I've tranquilized problem bears, relocated mountain lions that got too comfortable, even once had to deal with a rich guy's pet tiger. I've never seen anything like this. The way he looks at you, it's like he's your partner, not your pet." "He is," Alex said simply. Walsh gave a curt nod. "Keep the insurance paid up. I'll be back in 3 months." As the intense Montana summer bloomed into a breathtaking autumn, a new kind of challenge emerged. Their story, the article that well-meaning reporter had written, had taken on a life of its own. It had been picked up by national syndicates, framed as a heartwarming tale of a veteran and his extraordinary service animal. Letters began to arrive, not just from curious onlookers, but from other veterans. They wrote to Alex in shaky handwriting or careful email, sharing their own stories of invisible wounds and the dogs, horses, and even cats that were pulling them back from the brink. They asked for advice. They thanked him for showing that healing could come in wild, unexpected forms. The weight of their hope was immense, a responsibility Alex hadn't asked for but felt compelled to honor. He started spending his evenings at the old desk, writing back. He didn't offer platitudes. He wrote about the brutal honesty of routine, the discipline of caring for something that demanded your best self, the simple, grounding power of a daily walk in the woods. Onyx would lie beside the desk, and when Alex's shoulders would tense with the effort of finding the right words, the wolf would rise and nudge his elbow, a silent command to stop, to breathe, to be present. One evening, as the aspen trees blazed gold outside the window, Alex read a letter from a Marine who had lost both his legs to an IED. The man wrote that his service dog, a Labrador named Buddy, didn't care about the wheels he sat in, only the hands that fed him and the voice that praised him. Alex finished reading, his vision blurring. He looked down at Onyx, whose head was resting on his foot. "We got lucky, boy," he whispered. Onyx's tail thumped once on the floorboards. The wild pack's visits became more frequent as the days shortened. Their calls in the night were more insistent, a siren song of the coming winter and the hunt it would bring. One evening in late October, the entire pack was there, 7 strong, including 2 yearlings. They didn't just run the fence line. They sat in a semicircle, their eyes fixed on Onyx, who stood on the side of the divide. The gray alpha let out a long, complex howl that was less a song and more speech. It was an invitation, a summons. Alex's heart was in his throat. This was different. This felt final. Onyx stood silently for a long minute, listening. Then he turned and walked back to the porch where Alex stood. He didn't look back. But that night, Alex saw a restlessness in him he hadn't seen before. Onyx paced the cabin, his ears constantly swiveling toward the window, towards the calls of his kind. When he finally settled, it was with a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 2 worlds. "You can go," Alex said into the darkness, his voice rough. "If you need to, I'll understand." Onyx lifted his head from his paws and looked at Alex. In the moonlight, his blue eyes were luminous pools. He held Alex's gaze for a long moment, then stood, walked over to bed, and laid his head on the mattress next to Alex's hand. The message was as clear as if he'd spoken. His choice was made. His pack was here. The first snow fell in early November, a gentle dusting that whispered of the brutal blizzards to come. It was a circle closing. Alex stood on the porch with Onyx, watching the white flakes settle on the wolf's black fur, not melting but clinging like diamonds. He thought of the blood on the snow a year ago, the tiny, frozen creature he'd held against his chest. He was no longer the broken man, who had dragged himself through those days. The nightmares were now rare visitors. The hypervigilance had mellowed into a calm awareness. He had a purpose, not given to him by the army, but built by him, with 4 paws and a loyal heart at its center. Onyx, for his part, seemed to enter the cold months with a renewed sense of purpose. He patrolled the fenced area with proprietary air, his tracks the first to mark each new snowfall. He was in his element, a king in a crystal kingdom. During the worst of storms, he would lie by the door, a living barrier between Alex and the howling wind, a guardian in the truest sense. One afternoon, while splitting wood, Alex's axe slipped, and a sharp piece of wood flew up, gashing his forearm. It was a deep, bloody cut. Before he could even curse, Onyx was there. But it wasn't a panicked reaction. The wolf sniffed the wound, then looked up at Alex's face and let out a short, sharp bark, a sound he almost never made. It was an alert, a statement of fact. You are hurt. In that moment, any last, lingering fragment of doubt vanished. This was not instinct. This was care. This was a bond that had transcended the definitions of both man and beast. As the deep winter set in, isolating them for weeks at a time, they found a new, deep rhythm together. Their world shrank to the cabin, the wood stove, and the snow-covered enclosure. Alex read books aloud, his voice the only human sound for miles. Onyx listened, his head cocked, as if soothed by the rhythm of the language. They were 2 souls, one human, one wolf, wrapped in a silence that was no longer empty, but full. The storm that had brought them together had been an act of random violence from nature. The life they had built was a deliberate act of love, a defiance of every rule that said their world should never have touched. The fence around the property marked the boundary for the state, but the true territory they inhabited together, a country of trust, loyalty, and healing, had no fences at all. It was boundless, a country any of us would be lucky to find. 5 years after the night he'd pulled a frozen scrap of black fur from a blizzard, Alex Carter stood on his porch and watched the autumn light gild the mountains. The change in him was as profound as the seasonal shift. The hollowed-out man was gone, replaced by someone with a calm center, a man whose eyes no longer automatically scanned for threats, but could appreciate the simple beauty of a hawk circling on a thermal. This piece, this hard-won life, had a single massive black-furred cornerstone, Onyx. The wolf, now in the magnificent prime of his life, was a creature of breathtaking power and silent authority. At nearly 150 pounds, he was larger than any documented northwestern wolf, his size a testament to the constant care and nutrition he'd received. His coat was profound, light-absorbing black, now shot with distinguished silver around his muzzle and eyes. Those eyes, still that startling pale blue, held a depth of intelligence that went beyond canine, beyond even what most would believe possible. He was a living, breathing embodiment of the wild, and yet his chosen territory was of 5 fenced acres and the wooden cabin that constituted Alex's world. The legal compromise brokered by Judge Reed had held, but it was a peace maintained by constant, meticulous effort. The 8-foot steel fence was a permanent fixture, its presence a daily reminder of the precariousness of their situation. Alex maintained it with a soldier's discipline, checking for weaknesses, ensuring the locks were secure. The massive liability insurance premium was a yearly financial gut punch, but he paid it without hesitation, a necessary tie for their continued life together. Garrett Walsh's unannounced inspections had evolved from tense audits into almost social calls. The wildlife officer would walk the perimeter, but his steps were slower now, his eyes less suspicious. He'd often end up on the porch, accepting a mug of coffee, his gaze following Onyx as the wolf moved through his domain. He's different, you know, Walsh said on one such visit in late October. From the wild ones, calmer in his bones. But when he looks at you, he shook his head, searching for words. It's like he's assessing everything, understanding everything. It's not a predator's stare. It's a partner's. He knows you're not a threat to us, Alex replied, the us coming as naturally as breathing. The pack is still out there, Walsh mentioned casually, gesturing with his chin toward the dense forest. The gray alpha is getting old. They've got 2 new, strong younger males. There's been some tension. I thought you should know. Alex nodded. A familiar, faint anxiety stirred in his gut. He knew what that meant. An unstable pack meant challenges, and challenges were calls to the wild. The wild pack's calls were a nightly ritual, a siren song from the life Onyx had foregone. The invitation was always there, humming in the air between the trees. The legacy of their story was a subtle but tangible force in the valley. In town, Alex was no longer just a reclusive vet. He was a man who lived with the wolf. The well-meaning reporter's article had long ago been forgotten by the wider world, but its echo remained in the letters that still trickled in. They were mostly from other veterans now, men and women who had read about him in a support group forum or heard his story secondhand. Their letters spoke of a different kind of war, the internal one fought after the guns fell silent. They asked not for secrets, but for hope. How did you learn to be quiet inside? One had written, "My service dog licks my hand when I have nightmares." Wrote another, "It's the only thing that pulls me back." Answering these letters had become part of Alex's routine. He wrote back with a painstaking honesty, describing the brutal, monotonous, and glorious discipline of caring for a creature like Onyx. He wrote about the focus required, the way it pulled him out of his own head. He never offered easy answers, only the solid truth of his own experience. Onyx would lie beside the desk as he wrote, and when Alex's hand would cramp or his thoughts would spiral, the wolf would rise and nudge his elbow, a silent command to stop, to breathe, to take a walk. This was their life, a life of routine and profound simplicity. Mornings began with the wood stove and a large bowl of raw meat for Onyx. Their days were structured around long walks within the fence perimeter, patrols that were as much for Alex's sanity as for Onyx's exercise. The wolf knew every stump, every rock, every scent on the wind. He was a perfect barometer of the forest, his ears twitching at sounds Alex couldn't hear, his nose telling him stories of the night's activities. Dr. Reyes visited every month, her role now a blend of veterinarian and field researcher. Her notes had filled multiple binders. She documented everything from his blood work to his subtle communicative gestures. "It's the empathy that continues to astound me, Alex," she said during one visit, watching as Onyx gently herded Alex away from the fence line where he'd been staring too long at a distant storm cloud. "He doesn't just react to your mood. He anticipates it. It's as if he can smell a spike in your cortisol, sense a shift in your biochemistry, before you're even fully aware of the anxiety yourself." She closed her notebook. "He's not just a support animal. He's your guardian in the most fundamental biological sense." The first heavy snow of the season arrived in November, a silent, relentless blanket that covered the world in deep white. For Onyx, it was a return to his element. He reveled in the cold, his thick coat impervious to the biting wind. He would plow through snowdrifts with pure joy, his tracks the first and only marks on the pristine canvas of their enclosure. One evening, during a particularly brutal storm that mirrored the one of their first meeting, Alex woke from a rare, fading nightmare. The wind howled outside, but the cabin was warm and safe. Onyx was already awake, not tense or alert, but simply watching him from his bed by the door. In the dim light from the stove, his eyes glowed softly. "I remember," Alex whispered into the quiet. "I remember finding you. I was so empty, boy. I had nothing left to give." Onyx stood, padded silently across the room, and laid his heavy head on the mattress beside Alex's hand. He let out a deep, sighing breath, his warm exhalation ghosting across Alex's skin. The gesture needed no translation. It was a reminder, a confirmation. Asterisk, I know. I was empty too. Asterisk. As the long winter settled in, their world shrank to the cozy confines of the cabin. Alex read books aloud, his voice a steady drone against the silence. Onyx would listen, his ears twitching at the cadence of the words, soothed by the sound of his human's voice. They were two solitary creatures who had chosen to be solitary together, their bond a fortress against the cold and the dark memories. The wild pack's howls were more frequent in the winter, their songs a complex, urgent language of hunger and survival. One night, the calls were closer than ever, right at the fence line. Alex peered through the frost-rimed window to see the entire pack gathered there, 7 shadows in the moonlight. The aging gray alpha stood at the front, his gaze fixed on the cabin. He howled a long, drawn-out note that was less a song and more a direct address. It was a final summons, A passing of the torch. Onyx stood beside Alex at the window, his body still. He watched his kin, his own kind, the life he was born to lead. He listened to the Alpha's call, his ears pitched forward, absorbing every nuance. Alex's heart felt like a stone in his chest. This was the test he had always feared. But that night, Alex saw a resolve in Onyx he hadn't seen before. The wolf stood as a sentinel, his gaze fixed not on the wild freedom offered, but on the reflection of the man beside him in the glass. When he finally moved, it was not toward the door, but to his bed by the fire, where he lay down with a contented grunt. His choice was made. His pack was here. The first true sign that time was a predator even Onyx couldn't outrun came on a crisp autumn morning. He stumbled. It was barely a misstep, a slight hesitation as his rear leg seemed to momentarily forget its strength before finding purchase again. But Alex noticed. He noticed everything about Onyx. The wolf simply paused, shook his massive head as if dismissing a fly, and continued his stately walk. But the image was seared into Alex's mind. The unthinkable was beginning. Onyx was getting old. This was the 8th year since the blizzard, and the great wolf was entering the winter of his life. The signs, once noticed, became a constant, gentle ache in Alex's heart. The silver at his muzzle was no longer just a distinguished accent. It was a creeping frost that claimed more of his jet-black coat with each passing season. His leaps onto the porch, once effortless explosions of muscle, now required a visible, careful gathering of strength. He slept more deeply, and his breathing sometimes had a soft, wheezing quality on the coldest nights. Dr. Reyes confirmed it with her usual clinical gentleness. He's in remarkable condition for his age, Alex. But he's a wolf. Even with the best care, time is a predator even he can't outrun. Alex's entire world recalibrated around Onyx's comfort. Their long, vigorous hikes became shorter, more meandering strolls where the destination was irrelevant. Alex began adding supplements to his food, glucosamine for his joints, fish oil for his aging heart and coat. He piled extra blankets into Onyx's bed by the wood stove, creating a nest worthy of an aging monarch. The routines of care that had once saved Alex were now redirected, a lifelong debt being repaid with every gentle touch and patiently prepared meal. The wild world seemed to sense the shift in the great wolf's energy. The pack's visits to the fence line changed in character. The challenging postures from the younger, ambitious males ceased entirely. Now, when they came, it was with a quiet, almost reverent demeanor. Garrett Walsh, during one of his now social visits, shared the news that the old grizzled Alpha, Onyx's contemporary, was gone, likely fallen to a challenger or the relentless hunger of a deep winter. The new leader was a robust, dark-coated wolf with a confident gaze. This new Alpha would often sit just beyond the fence for long periods, not in challenge, but simply watching Onyx. It was less a stare down and more vigil, as if paying respects to a retired king. One afternoon, while Alex was splitting wood for the coming winter, a familiar, sharp pain lanced through his own knee, a legacy of a hard landing from a helicopter in a desert a world away. He winced, dropping the axe and rubbing the aching joint. Onyx, who had been lying in a patch of sun, observing the world with calm, half-lidded eyes, was immediately on his feet. He didn't whine nor nudge. He walked over and stood close, pressing his warm, solid shoulder firmly against Alex's leg, sharing his weight and his warmth. The gesture was a profound reversal, a silent communication that shook Alex to his core. I have been your strength for so long. It seemed to say, let me be your cane now. It was during this period of gentle, slowing twilight that a new thread was woven into the tapestry of their lives, one that would give Onyx's final chapter a profound new purpose. Garrett Walsh arrived one day, his official truck kicking up dust, his expression uncharacteristically grim. In the passenger seat was a heavy-duty wildlife kennel. I need your help, Alex, Walsh said, dispensing with any greeting. There's a situation, and you're the only one I can think of. He laid out a painful story. A rancher, enraged after losing a calf, had taken the law into his own hands, poisoning a deer carcass. The poison had worked its way up the food chain with devastating efficiency. The new dark-coated Alpha, the one who had watched Onyx with such respect, had consumed the tainted meat and died a slow, agonizing death. His mate a sleek, determined female, had been driven by desperation to feed her 4-month-old pups. She'd ventured too close to the rancher's cattle and had been shot on sight. The pups, left alone in the den, had been found by a group of backpackers, weak, starving, and crying for a mother who would never return. Fish and wildlife retrieved them. Walsh continued, his voice tight with a mixture of anger and sorrow. 3 of the 5 didn't make it past the first night. This little guy, he's a fighter. He's the last of his litter. He unlatched the kennel door. Inside, huddled in the back corner, was a small, trembling ball of gray and brown fur. It was a wolf pup, all enormous paws, floppy ears, and eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to swallow the light. The resemblance to the tiny, frozen creature Alex had once cupped in his hands was so striking it felt like a punch to the gut. The designated sanctuary is over capacity, and he's too young, too traumatized to even consider for any reintroduction program. Walsh explained, his plea clear in his eyes. He'll wither away in a concrete kennel. I thought if anyone in this world understood how to give a soul like this a second chance, it was you. Alex's gaze shifted from the shivering pup to Onyx. The old wolf had risen and approached the truck, his movements slower now, but still imbued with his innate grace. His wet black nose worked the air, sampling the complex sense story of fear, loss, and kin. He didn't growl. He didn't bare his teeth. He simply looked at the terrified pup for a long, silent moment, then turned his ancient, knowing eyes to Alex. He gave a slow, deliberate blink. It was a question, and it was an answer. The permit? Alex started, the practical part of his mind struggling to catch up with his heart, which had already made the decision. Walsh waved a dismissive hand, a small, conspiratorial smile finally breaking through his grim expression. The permit is for 1 therapeutic support animal. It doesn't specify which one. We'll figure out the paperwork. Consider him a foster, an emergency placement. And so, the pup, whom Alex named Leo, came to live in the cabin. The dynamic shifted overnight. Onyx, who had been gradually retreating into the quiet of old age, found a new, vital purpose. He became a teacher, a guardian, a foster father. He showed Leo the sun-warmed spot on the porch for napping. He demonstrated how to drink from the water bowl without splashing. When Leo, in a burst of playful energy, would yip and play bite too hard at Onyx's tail or ears, the old wolf wouldn't snap. He would simply turn and pin the squirming pup with single, heavy paw until Leo settled, teaching him boundaries with gentle, immutable force. He guided the clumsy pup on walks, stopping when Leo tired, his presence a steady anchor in a frightening new world. Leo, in turn, injected their quiet life with a burst of chaotic, joyful energy. His comical attempt to pounce on falling leaves, his clumsy rolls, and his high-pitched, playful barks made Alex laugh, a sound that now echoed more frequently through the once silent cabin. The pup was instinctively wary of the large human, but he watched Onyx's every interaction with Alex, learning through observation that this 2-legged creature was not a threat, but the source of all good things. Food, warmth, safety, and affection. He learned to trust Alex because his wolf father did. One evening, as a fiery sunset bled across the sky, Alex watched from the porch. Leo, exhausted from a day of exploration, curled his small body tightly against Onyx's much larger, warmer side. The old wolf lowered his great, noble head and began to gently, meticulously groom the pup's ruffled fur. A deep, rumbling, purr-like sound vibrated in Onyx's chest, a sound of pure, uncomplicated contentment. It was a scene of profound peace, a passing of the torch. It was a legacy of a rescue made in a snowstorm being actively, lovingly handed down. Alex understood then that this was a final, beautiful meaning of Onyx's incredible journey. He had not only saved one broken man from his internal blizzard, he was now ensuring the survival of another lost soul. He was imparting the hard-won lessons of their life together, trust, compassion, and the defiant strength of an unexpected family. The wild pack, now leaderless and scattered after the tragedies that had befallen them, stopped coming to the fence. Their collective howls, once a nightly feature of the mountain soundscape, grew fewer and more distant, eventually fading away altogether. It was as if the torch had been passed, not to a new alpha in the wild, but here, within this fenced sanctuary, to this venerable old wolf and the human he had chosen, and to the new, fragile life they were now nurturing together. Onyx's own howls became rare, his voice now a raspy, weathered echo of the powerful, valley-shaking cry it once was. But on the nights he did lift his head to sing, often with Leo attempting to join in with a comical, high-pitched yowl. It wasn't a call to the wilderness he had left behind. It was a song of fulfillment, a lullaby for the future, and a gentle, peaceful farewell to the mountains that had given him to Alex. He had fought his battles, guarded as human, and now, in the quiet, golden twilight of his years, he was raising his successor. His great work was complete. His legacy was secure, and it had a name, Leo. The deepest winter of Onyx's life settled over the cabin with profound, peaceful silence. The once boundless energy that had animated his powerful frame was now a soft, glowing ember. His world had shrunk to the warmth of the wood stove, the comfort of his blankets, and the two beings who comprised his entire universe. Alex, the human who had been his purpose, and Leo, the pup who was his living legacy. The great wolf now moved with slow, deliberate dignity, each step a conscious decision, each movement a testament to a life fully lived. Alex's care became his entire focus. He prepared special, soft meals that were easier for Onyx to eat, often hand-feeding him tender pieces of meat. He would spend hours simply sitting on the floor beside the old wolf, one hand resting on the rising and falling of his ribcage, reading aloud from books or just talking softly about their years together. "Remember the time you faced down that grizzly?" Alex would murmur, his voice thick with emotion. "Or how you used to howl at the moon until I joined in?" Onyx would respond with a slow wag of his tail or a soft huff, his pale blue eyes fixed on Alex's face, full of a love and understanding that needed no words. Leo, now growing into his lanky adolescence, seemed to intrinsically understand the solemnity of this time. His playful energy was tempered around Onyx. He would often lie nearby, watching the old wolf with a quiet reverence, occasionally creeping forward to gently groom Onyx's face or to curl up against his side, offering his youthful warmth. Onyx, in these moments, would rest his heavy head on the younger wolf's back, the teacher and the student bound in a silent, profound communion. He was imparting his final, most important lesson, how to die with grace, surrounded by love. The inevitable came on a clear, cold night in late February. The stars were brilliant, diamond-sharp points in the velvet blackness above the snow-blanketed landscape. Alex hadn't known it was coming. Onyx had stopped eating that morning, and his breathing had become a shallow, rhythmic whisper. He carried the old wolf, a heartbreakingly light burden in his arms now, to his bed by the stove, wrapping him in the softest blankets. Leo followed, whining softly, pressing close. Alex sat on the floor, his back against the wall, and lifted Onyx's head into his lap. He stroked the familiar, beloved face, the silver-frosted muzzle, the ears that had once been so constantly alert. He talked softly, recalling their first meeting, the blizzard, the countless days and nights that had woven them together into a single, unbreakable thread. "You saved me, boy," Alex whispered, his tears falling freely now, spotting the thick black fur. "You gave me my life back. It's okay. You can rest now. You've earned your rest." Onyx looked up at him, and in those ancient, intelligent eyes, Alex saw not fear, but a deep, abiding peace. The wolf let out one long, soft sigh, a breath that seemed to carry the weight of 8 years of loyalty, protection, and boundless love. Then he was still. The silence in the cabin was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire and Leo's confused, distressed whimper. Alex buried his face in Onyx's neck, sobbing, his body shaking with the force of his grief. He had lost his savior, his guardian, his best friend. The next few days were a blur of pain. With a heavy heart, Alex called Garrett Walsh. There were no official procedures this time, only the somber actions of friend. Together, they carried Onyx to a high ridge on the property, a place that looked out over the vast, wild valley he had once ruled in spirit. They buried him deep beneath a great pine tree, the earth frozen solid but yielding to their determined efforts. Leo watched the entire process from a distance, his head cocked, trying to comprehend the finality of it all. In the weeks that followed, a deep quiet descended upon the cabin. Alex moved through his days like a ghost, the routines that had once given his life structure now feeling hollow and meaningless. The absence of Onyx's presence was a physical ache. Leo grieved in his own way. He would wander the enclosure, sniffing at Onyx's favorite spots, his ears drooping. He slept not in his own bed, but on the blanket that still carried the old wolf scent. He was listless, his appetite diminished. For a while, it seemed as if the light had gone out of him, too. But the legacy of a wolf is not so easily extinguished. One morning, almost a month after Onyx's passing, Alex was jolted from a fitful sleep by a sound he hadn't heard in weeks. It was a howl, but it wasn't Onyx's deep, resonant call. It was younger, higher, filled with a questioning sorrow, but unmistakably powerful. It was Leo. Alex rushed to the window. The pup, now a young wolf, was standing on the porch, his head thrown back, singing his grief to the rising sun. It was a raw, beautiful, heartbreaking sound, and as Alex listened, something shifted inside him. The howl wasn't just an expression of loss. It was a declaration of existence. It was Leo finding his own voice, and in doing so, reminding Alex of his. He walked outside and sat on the porch steps. Leo stopped howling and looked at him, his yellow eyes, no longer the blue of puppyhood, gleaming. He walked over and laid his head in Alex's lap, just as Onyx had done so many times. The gesture was the same, but the feeling was new. It wasn't a replacement. It was a continuation. That day marked a turning point. Alex began to train Leo in earnest, not with the rigid discipline of his military past, but with the patient, gentle guidance Onyx had taught him. He taught him commands, boundaries, the rhythms of their life together. And Leo learned with a quick, eager intelligence that was all his own. He was different from Onyx, more playful, more openly affectionate, his spirit less shadowed by the pure wildness that had always been a part of his foster father. But the core was the same, a fierce loyalty, a deep empathy, and an unbreakable bond with the human he had chosen. Spring arrived, thawing the frozen earth and the frozen parts of Alex's heart. On the first warm day, Alex took Leo to Onyx's grave on the ridge. The snow had melted, and the first brave wildflowers were pushing through the soil. Leo sniffed the ground around the pine tree, his tail wagging slowly, as if in recognition and respect. "He taught us both, Leo," Alex said softly, his hand on the young wolf's shoulder. "Now it's our turn." As they turned to walk back down to the cabin, a movement in the distant tree line caught Alex's eye. He froze. There, standing at the edge of the forest, was a single wolf. It was a young female, her coat a mix of gray and tan. She wasn't part of the old pack. She was a disperser, seeking new territory, a new family. She looked at them for a long moment, then tipped her head back and let out a soft, inquiring howl. Leo's ears shot forward. He looked at Alex, then back at the female. He took a step forward, then stopped, looking back at Alex again for guidance, for permission. Alex's heart hammered. This was the circle, the choice that defined a wild heart. He thought of Onyx, turning away from his pack time and again. He thought of the love that had saved him. He looked at Leo, who was watching him, waiting. "Go on," Alex whispered. His voice choked. "Say hello." Leo let out an excited yip and bounded a few paces toward the tree line, then stopped, play bowing. The female wolf hesitated, then took a tentative step forward. It was the beginning of a new conversation, a new story. Alex didn't know what would happen. Perhaps she would leave. Perhaps she would stay. Perhaps in time, a new, small pack would form right here, on this land, a testament to the legacy of an abandoned puppy who knew the king and the man who had loved him. He stood on the ridge, the sun warm on his face, and watched as Leo, his legacy and his future, tentatively approached the wild. The circle was unbroken. The love born in a blizzard had not died. It had transformed, seeding the future with a legacy of wild, unwavering devotion. If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Bonds Unspoken. Every click helps us share more incredible moments that celebrate the bond between humans and animals. And be sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that reminds us what true loyalty feels like.